Now, when modelling the word fails and the child still can't say an L cluster after you, even though you've slowed it down and you might be doing simultaneous productions, this is where I like to get visual and I like to use multisensory cueing because I am trying to problem solve and figure out how I can help my student say their clusters with all the sounds together. So this is what makes this step quite unique, is that we give you the option of forward chaining and we give you the option of backward chaining. Now, forward chaining is where I will focus on that first sound. And forward chaining is something I might do if the child is deleting that first sound in the cluster. So in the example of sleep, if the child is saying leap or if they're saying weep, this is when I might use forward chaining because I would focus and I would start teaching this sound here, this cue. And I would say something like, do you see this? This is the snake. The sound he makes is s, and I would really focus on teaching this cue. And I might do little activities like every time I hold up this card, can you say that sound? Can you remember it? And once the child is successful, we then will go to the next part of the chain, leap. And I'll say to the student, do you think we can join this snaky sound that I know you can say with the next word? This is leap. And often I will familiarize the student with this card as well. So this is leap. He's leaping over the wall. Let's see if we can say it together. And this is when we might, I will model the word, but I've got a visual here. Sleep. So if you hear how I modeled that, I technically have modeled this word, sleep. I've said this word, but I've broken it down in a way that helps the child be successful. So forward chaining is a really great skill. It's a really great tip to use when your child is deleting that first sound and they're saying leap or weep when they really mean sleep. But I'm also going to share with you backward chaining because sometimes I use both depending on which one helps the student more. Now, backward chaining is something I usually start with if the student does have that first sound and they're saying that first sound in the consonant cluster, so they don't really need a visual cue to remember that, mad cat sound, but it's more the second part of the word that they're having difficulty with. So they might say fi, or they might be gliding and say fly. So backward chaining would focus on this part, lie. And I would get multiple productions of this. Lie, lie, lie. I familiarize the word. We make sure that the child understands this because this is a visual cue that is helping them to be successful. And sometimes I say to my students, these words are hard. Let's make it easier for ourselves. This is going to help you remember all those sounds so that it is easier to say that word. So you would start with lie, get multiple repetitions, and then say, you are so good at doing that L sound. Oh, I love how I can hear when you say lie and you lift up your tongue. Let's see if we can put that first sound on now. Fly. So that is when I would use backwards chaining typically, but I have had sessions where I have dipped between both of them depending on the child's breakdown and where they need my support most. Now, this is what your table setup can look like. You might have your initial sound and then the L word here and your target word, the words that are really trying to help the student say. You might either have them flipped over or you might have them over here because it is likely that if the child sees this, they're going to go back to the old way that they were saying it. So I like to use this as like a fresh slate and saying, I know we can do this. Let me show you how. So you might use your finger and move your finger across to make sure we're joining the sound. So we have k and then we have loud, so cloud. That is one little multisensory cueing I like to do. Otherwise, I like to grab a marker as well and I like to see if we can join the sound. Cloud. And I find these techniques very helpful for student because you might find that they have a little gap and they might say k loud, which is not technically joining those clusters. So I can erase a little bit here and say to the student, oh, I don't think you joined those two sounds together. Another thing is I could pull the cards apart and say, I think I heard a little gap here. Do you think we could say it faster? Cloud. And then we use our fingers, and I might stop if I hear the child stop. So this is some nice little problem solving. And what I will let you know is that it is harder to join those plosive sounds, the g, b, p, and k, than it is the fricatives, because fricatives, being long air and fricatives in nature, they are easier to join onto these L words. So I do find that I have to use more multisensory cues when I am teaching KL, GL, BL, and PL clusters. Now, I know as speech language pathologists, we have a lot of different activities and manipulatives that we use to engage our students. So this is just a really simple example of how you might get multiple repetitions and using something that's engaging with your students. So I have my magnetic chips here. So you might practice, if you're doing some forward chaining, just saying this sound first. I heard it. Yes, that's it. I heard your long air, or I saw your teeth on your lips, or I heard that mad cat sound, whatever cues the child needs. And then you might put some here for lip and have the student repeat that word and say that word. And then I might do something like, do you think we can say both of these together? And, if the child can, they can pick it up. So if they do say lip, they can do that. And I might then say, you might not realize this, but you actually just said a really hard word just then. You just said flip. Now, one of the biggest questions I get asked is, how long does this take? I want to let you know that as quickly as possible, I am trying to move on to those L cluster target words. I only use these cues as long as the child needs them, and I try to quickly fade them away as quickly as possible. So this just might be your little stepping stone. This just might be a type of visual cue, multisensory cue that you use to help your child be successful in those initial few sessions when you're trying to teach that L cluster. But when the child has those target words, this is where you can move all those cues aside and you can just use the deck for all of the L cluster targets. Now, if you also need visual cues and forward and backward chaining for S clusters, Bjorn's speech publications also have these S cluster elicitation decks. So you can use the same strategies, the same cues to help your students say L clusters and S clusters too.